Well, we're off to a fantastic start, and we now start the first formal session of the conference, which is looking at our Ambition 1 under the NBN Trust strategy, which is that the NBN Atlas is the go-to place for sharing, finding, accessing UK biodiversity data. And what better place to start with an update on the NBN Atlas itself. Now, traditionally, if you call it tradition, this section has been given by our data manager, by Sophie Ratcliffe in recent years, and has focused on new data sets that we've taken on board and shared with your support. But this time it's going to be a little bit different. As you know, Sophie has recently left the Trust, sadly, and we're in the process of, well, in fact, on Monday we appointed her successor, who will start very soon. So we're doing things a bit different this time, and you're getting a bit of a view under the bonnet by our very own lead developer for the NBN Atlas, Helen Manders-Jones.
Hi, I'm glad Lisa explained all that, because I think that title is a bit misleading, because I'm not, I do computing. I know all about computing. I understand the Atlas from a computing point of view. So what I thought I'd do in this talk is take the opportunity to explain the Atlas, talk to you about the Atlas, explain it in computing terms, but without using computing terms. And hopefully at the end of the talk you'll have more of an appreciation and an understanding as to what goes on behind the scenes when you do a download. I'll also introduce you to the small computing team behind the Atlas, a very small team, and I'll also go through the programme of work we've got planned for next year. So this talk I think is going to be very different to all the fabulous talks you're going to get. But, okay, so this first slide, now don't be alarmed when you see this, okay? This is probably the most complicated slide. Woo! So what that is showing you, right, the Atlas is not just like a big website with a big computer, database rather. It's actually 36 computers, and that's not all of them there. And they're all connected together, communicating with one another. And on each of those computers is an application, some code that's been developed, mostly by the ALA, the Atlas of Living Australia. That's right, in Australia. It's their platform, it's an open source platform, but we've gone on to modify and customise the code as well. So it's a very big platform. Just so that you understand, you can understand what's going on now. When you go to records to do a search, an occurrence search, those computers are the ones that are engaged in that search. They're the ones that are activated. Those are the ones that all work together to generate the results that you then see appearing on the records front end or on a download. And similarly, with species, when you go to species overview page, it's just those computers there. Mostly. They do also communicate with all the others, but it's mostly just those computers. Now, many of you will have heard, I suppose, well, who's heard of solar being mentioned before? Hands up if you've heard of solar. Because I know Sophie will have talked about solar all the time, saying, oh, we need to upgrade solar, oh, we've got problems with solar. And in fact, over the summer, we had to pause data processing because we had problems with solar instability, or we were afraid we'd have problems with solar instability. So it's obviously a crucial part of the Atlas. Does anybody actually know what solar is? No? No. No, you can. Okay, well, for us in computing, an occurrence record is actually a document. So you imagine in a document, like this is a document here, you've got lots of text, and you've got dates in there, and you've got spatial data, so coordinates, grid references. Well, we have over 250 million of these documents. And when you do a search, if you go on records front end and you do search for Melis, say, we have to search through all 250 million documents to find a match. And that's why, actually, if you just get just a few records returned, it still takes a bit of time, because we have to search through all 250 million documents. But the thing that does the searching is Solar. It's basically a search engine. And it's similar to Google search engine. Google searches all the documents, the website documents on a on the internet, and solar searches all the documents in the atlas, the occurrence records documents. And the way it does it actually is every month when we do the data processing, we feed solar all 250 million documents. It ingests the documents, it analyses the documents, and it actually creates an index, which is very similar to the index you get on the back of a book. So you look up some text and it'll tell you which documents that text will be found. You know, it's more complicated than that, obviously, but that's the general idea. Now, the reason why we had problems with solar, because we did for a couple of years, right, is that it's actually very complicated. And the way it had been configured, it wasn't adequate for the number of documents we had and also the number of queries that we were getting every day. So what we did about it was we learnt all about solar, and then we designed loads of tests, performance tests, loads of testing, and then we fired all these tests at different configurations of solar, and then we were able to determine the optimal configuration for solar. For the number of records we currently have and the number we're going to have in a year's time. Up to 300 million we've tested against. So the current setup for solar now should be good for up to 300 million records. And when we approach 300 million records, we'll have to do all the tests again, but with more documents. It never stops. So as a result of upgrading solar, we've seen a transformation. Solar has no problems anymore. We upgraded solar with a new configuration on the 27th of September, and prior to that, solar every day was struggling. You'd have very slow response times because solar was just falling over. There were four computers, and one of them would fall over and not speak to any of the others, and then we'd have to wait till it felt better and started talking to the others, and then you'd get the results. It's literally worked like that. And those orange and red squares show when the atlas was reporting that there was a problem. It says, atlas is unavailable, and there's a red dot. And so then you wouldn't be able to do anything with it. But after the 27th of September, it's predominantly green. Solar is not having problems at all. There were 3 isolated incidents, which annoys us to see that those orange, I felt like colouring them green, so we could pretend. But those were due to something else. One of them was due to a bot attack. Another one was due to somebody running a script or something, maybe scraping the site, but overloading the records front end or records web service. But we know we can take action, because before there was so much noise, so much going wrong, we didn't know what was happening, but now we understand and can sort those issues out. And we expect that going forward it's going to be more and more green, but there will be some days when there are some problems. So we saw that, we saw that we've seen an improvement with solar. Oh, I'm running out of time. Okay. There's so much to talk about. Even though we had, at the same time as upgrading solar, we had a huge increase in the number of records, because the butterfly conservation gave us 46 million records. We were so excited to receive those. Thank you very much. Those are awesome. So we've made a big jump in September from 208 to 254 million records, and solar is just perfect. Handles it, no problem. I want to talk about the importance of feedback. So we used to get a lot of feedback about it being really bad and not fit for purposes, it's no good, But we also want to hear, which is great to hear, we need to hear that, but we also need to hear if it's doing well, because we don't know, we just have our numbers to look at. So, if it's good feedback, come and tell us if you think the performance has improved since September. And these are the 2 people who are behind the computing with the atlas. There's me, obviously, and there's Keith, who's up there hiding. Keith lives down in Cornwall. I live all over the place. I travel around a lot. So I worked as a software engineer for many years, lots of different companies, big companies, small companies. And Keith worked as a software engineer for a digital agency, so he got to work on loads of different software projects. So between us, we have loads of experience, but we both really enjoy working for the atlas. It's great to be working on something that really matters and makes a difference, rather than just trying to make someone loads of money. It's fantastic, and they're a fantastic bunch of people as well, the NBN Trust. And just put things into perspective, it's a very big platform. The ALA, some people say ALA, if you don't know, it's actually the ALA. They have 16 members in their team, development team, systems team as well. So, and they only have 132 million records, but they do develop a lot of that platform, obviously, but still, it shows there's a big team, there's only 2 of us here. And this is next year's programme of work, which is probably the most interesting slide of all for you. Next January, we're going to migrate to a new data processing pipeline, which is very exciting for us. It's going to mean that we can probably be able to, instead of doing a monthly data processing, we'll do it on a more continuous basis, and we should have a reduction in infrastructure costs. Access controls, we've already made some really good progress in that. This is when data providers can blur their records to a public resolution, and then they can say to some people, all right, I'll give you access to the supplied resolution. We've done loads of work on that, but we've had to park it because of Sophie having left. Maps, we've done some really good work on that as well. I set up an open source project for developing components. So I've got some volunteer developers working. We developed some good map components so we can go forward with that when we get in a new data manager. Polygon to polygon searches, apparently this is something people will be very excited about. But for computing, it's exciting because the work required in sampling in order to make that possible is computationally too intensive. It's been infeasible. So what we're going to do is a proof of concept to run that sampling on some supercomputers. So that's, from a computing point of view, that's very interesting. And then there's other things there. I'll leave that slide open there. Some of that stuff is already in the Atlas. It was developed by the ALA, but we've had to switch it off because we're going to have to look at it and maybe customise it to make it work for us. So that's it, really.
Fabulous. Thank you, Helen. I told you it was going to be something different. Does anyone have any questions for Helen?
No. Talk to us. Come and talk to us afterwards if you want to.
There's a question here. Could you give a little bit more clarification what you mean by polygon to polygon proof of concept?
Yeah, I probably not know. I know about the computing, but it's something to do with the boundaries, isn't it? You got a point, and is it in this polygon or in this polygon, or it can be in both polygons at the same time. Something like that, Sophie said.
So you'd be able to draw a polygon, they would say which records are held within that polygon?
Something like that. I honestly.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Again, yes.
Yeah, hi, sorry.
That's okay.
When you say overhaul the metadata, how are you planning on changing the metadata?
I don't know, yes. And it sounds crazy, but that's data, you see.
Yeah.
And, that's not something that I don't know.
Our new data officer will be starting on the 11th of December, so we don't have too long to wait. And please do come forward with those questions when we're in a position to answer them. But yeah, as Helen said, she's a computing person and does a fantastic job together with Keith of not only keeping the Atlas up and running and performing well, but also developing it and enhancing it for the future. So thank you very much, Helen. Next, we have a double act focusing on sea search, which is a topic very close to my heart as a former sea search diver and sea search tutor back in the mists of time. But yeah, a project which is so very important and has achieved so much. So we have Charlotte Bolton, National Sea Search Coordinator with the Marine Conservation Society, and Ian Dixon, who is the Sea Search Scotland Coordinator at MCS. Thank you both.
Probably worked out I'm Charlotte.
Thank you.
Oh, now, we've only got 15 minutes, so I'm going to have to talk quick. I do talk quick. We've got 35 years of sea search to talk about. But to start with, thank you so much for the invitation to come and talk today. Fantastic excuse for me to come up from Dorset to Edinburgh. Love Edinburgh. We are data partners and we are members of the trust of the NBN. And personally and professionally, I mean, I think open data is where it's at. No point collecting it if you don't share it. So what I'm going to talk about very quickly is building on that 35 years of volunteer data that we've collected. What are we going to do with it? Piled it high? Let's do something important with it. Right, oh, plodger. Simple plodger, like that. Next. So, sea search, the origins of sea search. We're going back into the mists of time. I mean, I'm pretty old, but we're talking, the late 70s. The underwater year of conservation. The whole, the scuba diving, marine conservation, the Underwater Conservation Society that became the Marine Conservation Society in Bob Earl's shed in Ross-on-Wye. The Marine Nature Conservation Review, which was the professionals, going out there and trying to survey what was out there in the wet bit around the whole of the British Isles. And C-Search grew out of that sort of volunteer arm of that was set up by Bob Earl, saying, there's loads of divers, let's make use of them. They're going in the water, they're seeing things, let's get them to send in their records and we can use that. And that's basically all C-Search is, persuading people to use their hobby for a good reason. So, say the HLF years. So it started, it was all quite ad hoc, if you like. Then there was a big injection of cash from the Heritage Lottery Fund, and there was the National Coordinator post, which was my predecessor, Chris Wood, was hired by the Marine Conservation Society to kind of bring it all together and to formalise it. So there's a steering group, there's formal partnerships. I say that it's a programme that's delivered in partnership across the British Isles with wildlife trusts and with individuals, etc. It's not just the MCS. There's a lot of us involved in C-Search, and I know there's some people here. Somewhere we've got a Winter who's a coordinator, I've got Ian. So we have this network of regional coordinators interacting with our volunteers throughout the British Isles, and there's a formal training programme. So this is the start of our QC process. We train our volunteers in what they're recognising and how to record it in a standardised way. So in 2016, Chris, after 13 years, decided it was about time he got to retire and spend his time diving, or more time diving. So I took over from Chris. There's me on Chesil Beach, where I live, and there's me and Chris at Bovisand, proving that all of our coordinators, we are also volunteers with the programme. So we don't just get paid for doing what I call the boring paperwork, funding applications and budget spreadsheets. We're out there collecting data and submitting data as well. So volunteers, it's all about volunteers. We could not do what we have done and be as successful as we are without volunteers. That's the underpinning. Volunteers are the lifeblood of C-Search. So lots of crazy people in rubber suits, getting cold. There's a lot of cake in C-Search. I mean, what do you do to volunteers? It's all very well saying, thank you very much. It's like, here's some cake. And this is what your data has done. We couldn't do it without them. And I just think we can't reward them enough, really. One thing we have been doing is C-Search always started with divers, and we've been trying to broaden that out and get more people involved. And one thing is by making it, pushing it for snorkelers. The only rule about C-Search is that the data collection should happen in the sea. That's it. You can train in a quarry, but we want the data from the sea. You can do that on the beach, you can do that by snorkeling, or you can do that by diving. And we are seeing a lot more snorkel data coming in. They can get to places that divers can't. And it's been brilliant, and it's so much easier snorkeling than diving, let's face it. And Keith, standing at the back, is one of our, we've talked about Keith, I can't believe there's only 2 of you in the dev team, one of our snorkelers who's sending us data from places in Cornwall that we just didn't have data. So, and Rebecca is here, she's doing the same in Scotland. It's brilliant. Other things that are starting to come on, this is where, old fogies like me, it's like, oh my God, this is technology. But I think it's sort of brilliantly low-tech technology in some ways. We're getting a lot more data from these sort of remote techniques that can get records from places that divers and snorkelers can't. So baited remote underwater video, you're going to see some video later. It's a big metal frame with some weight and a bird feeder cage full of rotting fish and a camera. And you lob it off the side of a boat. A lot of this involves lobbing expensive stuff off the side of the boat and hoping you can get it back. With a camera, you put it down there, and then the animals will come back because you haven't got loud, bubbly divers. ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, camera on a long bit of string, and you can swim that around and again collect data that divers and snorkelers can't. So, volunteers collecting shed loads of data. What have we done with it? It goes on the NBN Atlas because it's pointless in somebody's filing cabinet. So we have all of our data goes onto the NBN Atlas. We are approaching that magic million taxon records thing. There's going to be a hell of a party when we hit that, I tell you. And it's all available under that CC BY license. I mean, obviously there's sensitive records that we have to blur, but basically it's all out there for everyone to use. And again, this is a personal and professional belief. Our volunteers, when we surveyed them, said, yeah, there's no point collecting it if people can't use it. because you can't complain that they put a wind farm where there's something really important and special and unique if you didn't tell someone that it was there. So absolutely, that runs through the whole of Sea Search. You can see, yes, we've got a mountain of data, and it's from pretty much everywhere. The coverage, the spatial coverage of the Sea Search data set is just amazing. And for that, we were shocked, amazed, people who were there in Cardiff 2017. We won the Open Data Award, which was simply amazing. I was, for someone who speaks as much as I do, I was actually speechless. I know people can't believe it, but it was a fantastic honour, and that just recognises, and we are so grateful for that. So, what do we do with the mountain of data? So, can't talk about all of this. On our website, we've got these shiny apps that says, where can we go? Where do we need data? And another one that says, where is my data from? Or where are the records of a particular taxon, a particular species? That you can just go to our website and interrogate those. Marine Recorder Online, God, I could speak all day about that. We've replaced, or the JNCC have led the project to replace Marine Recorder, which was, if anybody knows, it was horrid. It was a horrid thing. Marine Recorder Online is going to be fab. It is so much better for the data flow. We've talked about the State of Nature report. For the first time this year, we had benthic marine species in there, based on the work that Angus Jackson, our data officer, has done on the occupancy models, started with spiny lobster, and that data has gone into the State of Nature report, which for me, that's you know, it's not been a great year in lots of aspects. The weather's been rubbish, but we have the State of Nature report showing what Sea Search data can do. So there's the Plan Your Survey. Where shall I go? Where have we been? Where do we need to go? Turn the light blue squares red, turn the red squares dark blue. You can just go to the website and see where we've got data from. You can interrogate your own records. So there's all of our Sea Search survey events, and there's where Ian has sent in data from.
Hooray!
Hooray! Lots of Scotland. Funny that for the Scotland coordinator. And you can see that he comes to visit me in Portland as well. Come on holiday and do some work collecting Sea Search data.
Bit of moonlighting.
Absolutely. You know. And then we could have narrowed that down to say, where has Ian seen records of a particular taxon? So it's great. Volunteers can go and see what their data is doing. So what does it do? Well, it goes into a black hole, right? You fill in one of those forms that takes so long after the dive, you just paperwork. But where does it go? It does not go into a black hole. I'm going to skim over this because I know it's a bit, but you collect it, we put it into Marine Recorder Online, and then it goes to Dash, it goes to Medin for the metadata, it goes to the NBN, then it goes global. This data is available globally. What Marine Recorder Online is going to give us is automated data flow. Thank you. No more humans involved. And it's going to update nightly. So none of this, once a year we fight with Marine Recorder and get it updated. It will just happen automatically and quickly. Hurrah! So the overall value of our Sea Search data set is huge. It's all open, we're making data work for nature, and we're making the Atlas the go-to place. That's what Sea Search does. I'm sorry, I knew I'd end up talking too much. Ian's going to give you a Scottish view on this, with the making it work for nature in Scotland. Sorry.
Thanks, Charlotte. Thank you. Okay, yeah. So you've heard about the citizen science bits and how it's basically divers going out. Now it's snorkelers, intertidal walkers and rock poolers as well. Everybody can go out and fill forms in on what they've seen on the beach or out at sea. So how does this work on the ground? Well, in Sea Search, we encourage people to go out on their own or organise their own trips, go diving in their own backyard or whatever. We also organise trips occasionally through the year as well that people can come and join on, in which we focus on particular areas or particular species, that kind of thing. And I'm just going to take you through a few examples of a particular story based on the flapper skate, which is Dipterus intermedius. It's a critically endangered species. Not much is known about it, really. A few divers are lucky enough to see it underwater. but it occurs largely in the North Sea and off Scotland's northwest coast. Very little is known about its breeding grounds. For critically endangered species, how are you going to protect it? You've got to know where it breeds, and very little was known about that a short while ago. One thing that is known is that their eggs, after they're laid, they take about 18 months to hatch. And all that while, they're sitting on the seabed and they're very sensitive to physical disturbance, such as from dredging activities or other activities disturbing the seabed. And I thought, well, here's a little video just to show what a flapper skate is. So these are amazing skates. They are about 2 to 3 meters across. They're pretty big fish. And I have to thank David Ainsley, a friend of mine, for allowing me to show this video that he took of this particular individual somewhere in the Firth of Lorne. But they're very graceful. Okay, so continuing the story onwards, occasionally you get calls for help from local enthusiasts, people in the local communities who hear of something happening. And in this case, it was a fisherman reporting the presence of flapper skate eggs in a particular location at Skye, or just off Skye, in 2019. So there's a call for divers to come and have a look. And this particular site where these flapper skate eggs are reported, it's all surrounded by fishing areas. So in other words, it's quite vulnerable to seabed disturbance potentially. So these eggs are quite big. That's a picture of a flapper skate egg there. It's about the size of a sheet of A4. So if you compare that to what you might be familiar with, mermaids' purses, it's an order of magnitude larger. So sea searchers were involved in kind of the initial dives at this site to go and have a look, document it, fill in sea search forms, and hand in the data. And as a result of that, an urgent marine protected area was declared in March 2021. That shows you the area of it, just off on the inner sound off Skye. And then once that was declared, that was the sort of start for a lot of more intense research in the local area. And they found that there were actually larger numbers of eggs outside the urgently protected area. So as a result of that, the original site was revoked, and then the whole thing was redesignated and enlarged in December 2021. And finally, the whole site now has proper protection as a designated marine protected area as of February this year. And just a little bit of a slide just to show you work that's been done up in Orkney by a colleague of mine, another Scotland coordinator, Karen Boswava, herself and the Orkney Skate Trust and Clasina, which is a dive charter boat. They've been doing work dropping these baited remote underwater video systems over the side, as well as doing all the diving stuff. And the wonder about these bruvs is what they actually show. And just got a little bit of video here with some sound effects. These basically put a little piece of bait in a little cage underneath the camera on the seabed. So this is about 35, 40 meters depth. You're getting all the noise of the fish butting up against the bruv, and in a while it's going to be gobbling up the bait out of that pot that you can see just next to it. So that we saw a lot of skates. They're all females, different colorations, which can be used potentially for identification as well of individuals. So that's it, basically.
It doesn't get better than that, does it? The immediacy of making data work for nature, collecting it, getting an MPA designated on a temporary basis and then permanent. I mean, just
It's
fantastic.
That's why we do it.
Yeah.
That's why we do it.
It's just amazing. So, we don't have time for questions, I'm afraid, but we will hopefully have a little time for Q&A right at the end of the talks in this session. So thank you both so much.
We're around all day and in the pub later.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, back in May, a group of very, very brainy people got together in the Turing Institute in the British Library in London and pored over some very specific NBN Atlas related challenges. It was incredibly exciting to be sort of a fly on the wall for part of that conversation. And our next speaker is Simon Rolfe from UKCEH, who was one of the very large brains in the room and the facilitator of the activity as well. And he's going to tell us a little bit about it. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks, Lisa. So from 35 years of work to something that took 1 week, so temper your expectations a little bit here. But yeah, so this was, I'm presenting the outcome of a data study group hosted by the Alan Turing Institute with involvement from Natural England and the NBN Trust, with this objective to assess comprehensiveness and also highlight the impact of data providers. Those of you who haven't heard of the Alan Turing Institute, it's trying to position itself as the research institute in the UK for data science and AI. I'm sure you'll hear a lot more about them in the coming years in the new strategy that came out this year. Environment sustainability was identified as one of the grand challenges, so they're working quite a lot in this area. But yeah, if I start off with what is a data study group. So it's a week-long intensive collaborative hackathon where it's bringing together people from industry, people from academia, NGOs like the NBN Trust here, to deliver solutions within this very time-constrained period of 1 week on real-world problems. So the NBN Trust within this group was acting as what they described the challenge owner. So they're presenting the problem and providing support, and it was really great in the week to have Helen and Sophie from the NBN Trust, and also Mike Prince from Natural England coming along to get stuck in. As well as the challenge owners, we had a principal investigator, Sylvia, and she kind of provided like a high-level steer, making sure we were going broadly the right direction. We had 2 facilitators. I was one of those, making sure everyone's getting involved, making sure we're going to have things done by the end of the week. And then this really great group of researchers, from PhD students to postdocs to data scientists like myself, from quite a wide variety of sectors. We had people from natural sciences, but also astrophysicists, data scientists, all sorts. So quite a good mix of people there. But what are we trying to achieve? So firstly, anyone who's used the Atlas is aware that there are gaps, and so we first want to think about how can we identify the coverage and the gaps of the NBN Atlas. And then building on from that, which species do we have coverage for, which ones don't we? And then I'm sure something very relevant to this group here is how can we highlight the value that the data providers offer to the Atlas. It's nothing without its data providers, but how can we really celebrate their contributions? And to constrain the scope a little bit, because there's quite a lot of data in the Atlas, we were working with 943 priority species for England records between 1970 and 2020. Still gave us a good pool of 10 million observations. And I think this theme of the session is about positioning the NBN Atlas as the place to go. And I think this is, in a time-limited event like this, you don't have the time to go and contact all the other people to get data from all sorts of under people's beds or whatever. So I think it was really good exercise testing this role of the NBN as the place to go. We don't have time to get anywhere else, so we're working from the NBN Atlas. How did we approach the challenge? This quite big challenge, as I'm sure you were, in quite a limited time frame. So firstly, we were simply getting to grips with the data, which in an atlas setting means making maps. Some of these people hadn't used the NBN Atlas before, so it was really good as an exercise just to get people working with the data, understanding the spatial, the taxonomic biases. And we started to realize this is quite a big challenge. And so in the end, we're thinking more about the spatial biases, which I think is probably a more intuitive way to think about it, considering it is an atlas. But yeah, we sort of started thinking about the spatial biases. But it can be quite hard to identify coverage and gaps without a comparison. So, for example, I realized I looked at these slides last night. The numbers of records are actually wrong, so ignore them. But say, for example, we had some number of records for an area. That number on its own, in isolation, can feel a bit aimless. It's like, okay, is that lots? Is that not very many? Is that more than we expect, less than we expect? So we kind of latched on to the idea about using reasonable comparisons to facilitate actually identifying these gaps in coverage in a useful, actionable way. So if we think about the density of records in an area versus the density of records everywhere else in England, and then sort of calculate the ratio of that, we came up with what we called a occupancy discrepancy, density discrepancy, one of those. And that value kind of gave us an indication. Very broad brush. There's all sorts of things that go into why a species has been recorded in a location, its ecology, habitat availability, who's there. But it kind of gave us an indication for that species in that location, more or less recorded than average. And then we pulled that across all different species. We put together a little dashboard where we're thinking about, okay, what taxonomic groups do we have coverage for? Which ones don't we? And then we can rank those for identifying particular species. But once we've got a species, we're thinking, okay, what's the next step? Where do we need to get data from? So this is where we took our useful comparisons to the next stage, thinking about environment-based gap identification. So if we pull in some environmental data, such as land cover, climate, we can predict where we might expect a species to be and compare it to where we've got data. So then we've got this reasonable comparison, where we expect it, where have we got data. And then we started pulling out these maps where we've got lots of points where we predict the species. This is a nice dormouse here, but we don't have the data. But of course, that's quite a lot of points. We can't sample all of them. So we're also kind of thinking around where is the model uncertain about the data, because we might not have data from a particular area, but we might actually be able to predict that with a model quite easily. And so we was trying to think about, on the left, we've kind of got where the model predicts the species might be. And then on the right, we've got where the model is uncertain. And this may be where we've got records, maybe where we don't have records, but it kind of gives us a different way to target these gaps. So we thought about the sort of first two objectives, what species, where should we go? But we kind of then wanted to change tack, thinking about how can we highlight the value of the data providers. So we're trying to get a handle on the data providers, and we did a clustering analysis where we identified sort of 4 key groups of data providers. The most common, the most prevalent is the champions, which is really great. We identified them as having verified data, high spatial resolution, all the various metadata was present. And then from that, we had a couple of different groups where either the date information wasn't there, maybe it was sort of more historic data and the date was more vague. We also had a different cluster where there wasn't the same verification that they were providing. And then we had this other group that's sort of kind of in the middle, where some of the data was verified, some of the data had the various metadata. And also, to highlight the champions were also, one of the metrics there is whether the license, what portion of the data was open. And of course, that's a very important feature of being a data champion within this. We're starting to think about different ways we could provide data providers a way to understand the impact of their data. So we started sketching out, okay, what would sort of like a dashboard look like, where we've got our maps, we started to explore the temporal dimension a little bit here, and this is where we could incorporate that clustering, and be like, okay, what cluster am I in, how do I compare to other data providers, to kind of give you that useful perspective of your use, and kind of give data providers metrics to be able to say, look what we're doing, we're making an impact. And then another way, kind of linking back to the species distribution modeling we were doing earlier, is what we explored what would happen if you took away the data that you're providing. How does that impact what we know about biodiversity? So here are some examples of some maps where, for hedgehogs in the East Midlands, where we modeled the species with all of the data, and then we removed data providers one by one. And we can kind of get a feel for, very quantitatively, where the impact of that data provider is having in terms of our knowledge of species distributions. So we felt that was a really quite good way of visualizing that. But yes, it was only a week, so that's kind of wraps up the main activities. In terms of our main conclusions, I'm sure anyone would agree that the gaps it's not just gaps and no gaps, there's all sorts of different dimensions to it. But we really found that identifying these reasonable comparisons kind of moved us away from thinking about gaps all week and trying to identify what is a gap, and to be like, okay, we need to be able to make actions, we need to prioritize what's a reasonable comparison we can use to identify these gaps, and the importance of combining with other data. The atlas is great, but in isolation, it can be a bit limited in what you can do. Also, some reflections on the sort of data study group format. It was time limited, which is really successful for generating lots of ideas. But I keep thinking back, like, well, if I had one more day to work on this, or a bit more time to work on that. So we've basically given more work for the NBN Trust to do. I think it was good in terms of raising the profile of the NBN Trust and the Atlas amongst these people that may not have used it before, especially within the Alan Turing Institute, who are looking to work more in this environmental space. And within that week, we also produced a report. We were very productive. There's a picture of us briefly when we went outside rather than being a laptop. You can find the report online. I was going to do a QR code, but you can just search NBN Turing and it gets you there, so that's probably quicker. And yeah, last to say thanks to Natural England, Alan Turing Institute and the NBN Trust for making this happen. Thank you.
Well, and thank you to Simon as well for making it happen, because I think without your input and your knowledge from your data science work at UKCH, it would have been that much easier for the data study group to have kind of gone off on a tangent and never come back. But you sort of grounded them, I think, around UK biodiversity data needs and really made it a success. So I'd encourage you to read the report. We've got time for one question, if anyone has a question. Yes, Charlotte.
I was really interested, when you showed the difference, the change, if you took away a data provider, do you think that's just down to that data provider giving you their data? Or do you think that's kind of like a vehicle for other people to get kind of pulled in, that they see that it's not a blank sheet, they say, oh look, I can go out with these people. Is that what it is that's encouraging people? So if you took that away, you'd lose all of that infrastructure? Do you have a feeling for why losing one data provider has that seemingly that big an impact?
Well, I think because the data providers are often very geographically separate, and so if you take away one data provider, you lose information from one region, which maybe impacts what you know about split that region, but also does impact the other region. I think you're right. It was kind of we were sort of negatively framed around taking data out. We could also ask the same question, if we had your data in this area, we could improve our understanding of species distributions by this. So you could, we could use it kind of both ways.
I think it's that's showing people that there is a community out there. You are not a lone nerdy person doing this. There is a community of data providers. And here is the map showing where they are. And that encourages more people to join in.
That's what we can hope, yes. I think highlighting the value of data providers is very valuable, and I think these sorts of visualizations help that.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. Our final presentation in this first morning session is from Kyle Kopus, who's the Communications Manager at GBIF. Now, this time last year, we had a presentation from GBIF which really flagged and I think brought home to so many people in the audience that the UK was no longer a full voting member of GBIF and was possibly on the brink of, being dropped altogether, if you like. And so our community kind of got together and pushed it. And the NBN Trust, I'm proud to say, really helped stir up a bit of action around that. And fantastically, the UK is now, again, a full voting member of GBIF, and the NBN Trust is working with the other members of the UK delegation to make sure that we can be as active as possible in the GBIF community and that we can get, all the more from that in terms of enriching our own data management and accessibility and impact. So over to you, Kyle. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. And thanks, too, for maybe taking 20, 30 seconds out of a talk for me. As Neil said earlier, the agenda is stuffed to the gills. So is my slide deck. I actually, when I heard Charlotte say the phrase shed loads, my provincial ear heard something different initially. As many of you know, GBIF really is replicated in microcosm in the work that you do in NBN. We're a network and data infrastructure dedicated to making data freely and openly available to anyone, anywhere, right? With that sort of amalgamated identity, there are a number of ways to look at us. And you can do that sort of by the numbers, in terms of various kinds of metrics we can pull out. You can look at the data, which, we sometimes joke that this isn't a map of biodiversity, richness, certainly not. It's more a map of money. Where are people investing in actually digitizing, collecting, and sharing data? We can look at national participation, the formal members, where does the money that comes into GBIF come from? And we can look at where the data comes from. The third line in that inset table or chart is probably of considerable interest to you, not least, because as mentioned, the UK has returned to a member in full standing, good standing, as a voting participant in GBIF. So we're very grateful for all that the various constituents have done to lobby that. And now the task is to sort of maintain that persistence. This is done on short-term funding. So just as the question to the Cabinet Secretary earlier about, this difference between short-term and long-term, we face that, and we will face it again very soon. The data sharing network from the UK is the third largest, I think, in terms of, we've got different metrics. Actually, it's an important community by any measure, as is the user group, as you can see from these different statistics. But what I've specifically been asked to talk about or touch on today is the value of data and the value of GBIF and bringing that back to national scale for NBN. I'm going to run through three things quickly here, right? So economic and other value and impact of GBIF. I'm going to talk about the value of data use, sort of the fact that this is not the black hole, as Charlotte mentioned. And then highlight sort of how we do this and the value of data sharing, brought up in the last talk. So I'm going to start with a report that we published, or our contractors published, Deloitte unit in Canberra, that really took the first global look at the value of the network infrastructure and services in the GBIF network. First draft of this was presented at our annual board meeting last year, or a year ago, October. And in that, the participants, the countries that pay the bill for GBIF, actually said, we need you to make sure that this is something we can scale down that's useful at a national level. So we went back to our colleagues with Deloitte and developed a survey, and we're able to develop some specific metrics, leading to the publication of the final report in May this year. I'm going to skip over most of the details of the method. You can find information about the report from our news item detailing it, and then the report itself. But I'm going to focus instead on the final results and tie those back into some different things. If all this sounds familiar, you know, EMBL, EBI, and more recently the Natural History Museum have done similar sorts of things. As these sources of knowledge, we're really interested in trying, and in some cases we have to be able to put some dollar or pound or euro figures on the value of what we do and what these data sharing activities do. So our report also produced some rather eye-popping numbers. The top level finding was that for every euro invested in GBIF, users receive 3 in benefits, and there's potentially up to 12 times the influence impact at societal level. We also found that almost half of the data users that were surveyed said that they couldn't do their work without GBIF. Half. So for me as a communicator, it was really fun to have this report that's looking to fix an economic value on the value of GBIF, have half the respondents of the survey say, actually it's priceless to it. So, ironies of life. We also don't capture some of the other things that we do that we are certain that are important. And perhaps, you know, we're able to capture these in anecdotal ways, sometimes reflected in the report. One is around skills development and training. This leads into a lot of different personal and professional development activities across our network. I'd strongly encourage you, if you take an interest in being involved in the global activities, to approach me, approach Lisa, other members of NBN, and we'll see if there are ways that we can kind of fit you in. I'm sure that there's a place for this, as I think is detailed in the different talks earlier already. And then also something we were only able to capture anecdotally, something that should be important to NBN members, is the value of shared infrastructure. In various forms and formats. And the reason I point that out, as the first talk did, the NBN runs on software developed in Australia by our colleagues in Australia. So this has a major impact on the operating costs of different partners and institutions who are involved across the network. And I'm going to sort of bring the infrastructure bit together with 2 different pieces that are effectively being used in tandem in the UK. The first is the Global Registry of Scientific Collections. This is something that was originally developed in the Smithsonian Institution, and in 2018 they asked GBIF to adopt it, which we did. It was unstable. We sort of stabilized the system, and then we had it and sort of said, well, what do we do with it? So we invested some time, resources, effort within the community to further develop this. And it is now a very vibrant, or reflects a very vibrant community around the world, with active editors, curators, helping edit and prepare current descriptions of all the different collections around the world. And in the UK, the collections community has taken up the use of our hosted portal service. This is something we launched 2 years ago and was sort of immediately picked up in different places. It's replaced infrastructures in places like Colombia, the US, South Africa, highly technically skilled countries, but they're able to recoup some of the cost savings and allocate those for other activities and not have to stand up a basic, simple data access portal. So within the UK, the Disco UK group has actually used this platform, which enables them to get at the collections information that's already in GBIF, align it with the descriptions that are already in GR-Cycle or that they're updating in GR-Cycle, and not have to wait for tangible results from the larger Disco Europe activities on their infrastructure. And so I'm going to finish with downscaling a few things. This is maybe the sort of key bit for bringing this down to national scale. The economic report from Deloitte down to national scale was the finding that users who reported that they used the data in publications, on average said it saved them 64 hours of time that would be spent finding data elsewhere. This gives us a really handy formula for downscaling this in whatever currency. And if we take the number of GBIF-enabled papers over time, times an hourly wage, times that 64 hours, it gives you a sense, at least an estimate, of the value of that research, or value of the time savings in research. One measure, partial one, but at least a place toward fixing some value. Apologies for the font explosions here. In 2014 to 16, GBIF was averaging about 1 peer-reviewed paper a day. So the data are supporting the findings in 1 peer-reviewed paper a day. We're now at about 5. So this has some real impact. We collect these and share these examples. I'm going to try to walk you through one quick example here and show you how we do this. We have a paper that was published that does cite GBIF using a DOI. So this is open and transparent and reproducible science. That DOI resolves to basically a registry page where we can say, this data came from all these different sources. In this case, 1,300 data sets and more than 300 publishers. And if you search in it, and we're going to improve the search function, you may find yourself, if you're already sharing data through GBIF. And in this case, we can see that it's related to a data set that comes back in viewed in aggregate here. And that number of citations is what comes out of the end of this process. We show that on our own pages, right? Our own web pages, but we've tried to make it easy for you to share that sort of information and show the range and diversity of research and policy documents that your data is supporting when data is accessed through GBIF. So we have a very simple widget that allows you with a few lines of code to show a button on the number of citations and link through to that, or even embed kind of a ticker showing the latest research that you've enabled. So I hope I've given you at least some tangible measures of what value we bring to you. We are always willing to support outreach activities to sort of explain this wider thing. If we can do that by supporting you with other materials that we produce, by all means ask me, look for us, request them. And with that, I'll say thanks and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you so much, Kyle. I'm sure you'll agree that was really exciting, and I bet there'll be lots of people going and creating those buttons now and enjoying being able to demonstrate that impact in the way that you can through GBIF. And it's lots of food for thought for us as well at the NBN Trust as to how we could provide that kind of functionality based on data access directly through the NBN Atlas. So thank you so much. We have a few minutes, couple of minutes for any questions for any of our speakers. So if anyone would like to ask any questions, we've got a hand at the back there. Thank you. Belinda.
Presentation. It was your presentation today at NBN Conference that stimulated me to say, come on, we NBN have to play a role in making sure UK is a full voting member of GBIF. It's so important. I was really interested in what you were saying about the costs and trying to find a lightweight version of how we can help members save costs or be more cost efficient. I'm thinking that if we achieve the catastrophic success that we might in massively increased volumes of biodiversity data, eDNA data, etc., that actually increases costs to us as NBN and probably all of your members and possibly even GBIF as well. So with success comes cost. How do we strategize for catastrophic success?
good problems to have, right? Yes, I would say actually you maybe characterized more succinctly our recent activities within the Secretariat than we've done so ourselves. Let me start by saying that your work really is, all of the issues, topics, challenges, achievements that you're outlining are the kinds of things that we detail and see every day across the wider network. So that's, another reason that we really want to encourage engagement, at multiple levels between GBIF and NBN and the wider NBN community. One of the things that we are currently doing is trying to make sure that we're embedded within various global activities that will unlock resources as the wider polity comes to grips with the fact that we haven't really funded nature, and all of a sudden we're really worried about it. So, we get the flash guys in nice suits from the financial institutions come and say, right, well, show us the data and we'll, spin something up. We want to sort of make sure that they understand where this has come from, what's needed to expand it, and what we're on the verge of expanding because of some of these areas, and being able to put in systematic levels of funding that can distribute and flow through the network, whether directly to institutions or, on a contract basis, because we do see wider interest right now in making use of the data, particularly in the private sector, understanding things like the gaps and biases, trying to come to grips with what are the data products that are needed to align with these with the kinds of indicators and frameworks they're dealing with. So we're very aware that, catastrophic success is not something that bringing a lot of cash to Copenhagen is going to solve. So we're really we operate in it as a distributed network, and we're eager to see any advances, and we do feel that we are advancing. Any advances we make are things that can be, to the extent possible, fairly and equitably distributed to support the work where it goes on. I know that's a general answer, but I really want to stress we're on the same wavelength about this.
Thank you.
Hi, Vicky Piantas with Google, the London Environment Representative. We've heard lots about the NBN's 36 computers working to power the server and GBIF, some computers are involved in that. As an industry, how are we offsetting for all of that intensive computer use?
I can say that we actually, in our work program next year, are set to prepare, fulfill a requirement that we prepare a proper accounting of that. We have, on a tactical level, been quite interested in that and careful in that and how we set up our own systems within GBIF. I'll leave it to Lisa on NBN. But yeah, we're quite aware that there is a footprint, and we need to be able to define it and clearly offset it to the extent needed.
I should say at NBN we use AWS, remember that possible delivery, but AWS are on a mission to reach net zero. So they're doing a lot of work.
Indeed, and it's a commitment within our strategy as well to move towards net zero overall, and we're aware that that computing impact footprint is one of the most significant ones, because we're a really small charity and we're all home-based remote working now, so we don't have an office. But it's an area that we're learning. Actually, we've spent the last year attending webinars on sort of digital ecological footprints and that sort of thing, and within the next 12 months we're hoping to formally audit our carbon footprint and then put a strategy in place. But a lot of it will come down to optimization of servers and so on, as Helen mentioned, which AWS are really helping us with, so that we're not, so we're only using the capacity that we need. Thank you. Question back there.
From Wildlife Information Centre. The question for the Alan Turing Institute's gentleman from there was talking about analysing gaps in the data, and one of the areas that you were talking about was bringing in environmental parameters into understanding the validity of the gap or the nature of the gap. What is
So within the scope of the data study group, being quite time limited, we were just using national scale, the UKCH land cover map, and some fairly standard species modelling bioclimatic variables. So fairly coarse scale stuff, fairly general. It's not going to maybe apply at quite such a local level, but getting sort of just to test to see if it works, then it was good. But I think there's a lot more going on in terms of really the sophisticated modelling of species distributions, using remote sensing and computer vision of satellite images, and I think there's a lot more to get to that really useful comparison around where do we know and where don't we know, and therefore where do we need data in terms of validating models as opposed to just sort of collecting data.
Thank you.